So welcome to this week's Treasury Career Corner podcast, where I interview Treasury professionals about their Treasury careers. Each and every week, I talk to Treasurers about how they built their careers, where they are now, and where they see both themselves and the Treasury profession going to next. This week's show, I'm joined by Chris Wikoff, the Executive Vice President and Treasurer at Intrado, previously known as West Corporation. Now, the group itself, I hope I've said that right, Intrado, they are headquartered in Omaha, in Nebraska, Fortune 1000 company, and they're a global provider of communications and network infrastructure services with over $2 billion in annual revenues. Now, I'll get Chris to explain a bit more about them later on in the show, but he's been within Treasury for a number of years now, first discovering in finance and then making the move whilst with CommScope into Treasury itself. But I'm going to dial it right back to the beginning and how you first really maybe discovered finance and Treasury, maybe back to university days and then up to now. We'll rocket through that, but then talk a bit more about some of your views, Chris, about Treasury and the lot. But take us back to the very beginning, business degree, and then you discovered finance, natural step, and then Treasury. Would that be right?
Yes, that's right. And great to speak with you, Mike. I've been looking forward to this. Yeah, I went to school, University of South Carolina, studying international business, and really thankful for, where that has led me. Didn't necessarily plan on a career in 20 years in corporate treasury and corporate finance, but, really getting that foundation in international business couldn't ask for a better foundation and where my career has led me today. So I did have some jobs in finance prior to joining Lucent Technologies that then later became Avaya Inc. But I would say that's really the point at which my career really started to take off. And since then, which was around early 2000 timeframe, has really been concentrated in large global technology companies and specifically within the telecommunications equipment and communications space.
And then with that, you said, Avaya and things like that. So perhaps talk us through, because that then led you to CommScope. The roles at Avaya, they were preparing you within finance, but then what happened next sort of thing? How did you then come across CommScope and that transition?
Yeah, really when I joined Lucent Technologies in January of 2000, Avaya Inc. wasn't even known, at least in the general public at that point. I joined Lucent Technologies, and within a couple of months, literally, they announced the spinoff of about $8 million of their revenue and certain divisions to become Avaya Communications. It was a global spinoff of the public company Lucent Technologies, and it was a massive undertaking. And the division that I was a part of, Network Products Group division, I quickly had the opportunity and found myself in all of the project planning to spin off that business for the division that I was a part of around the world. And it was just a phenomenal experience, not only traveling around the world, but working very cross-functionally with distribution and supply chain, manufacturing, certainly, all of the finance, accounting, tax, and really working with a large number of people to be able to support and facilitate that spinoff of a very large and complicated business. That experience then enabled me to move into a division controller role within Avaya, and specifically a connectivity solutions business here in Omaha, Nebraska, that then later became the target of an acquisition by CommScope Inc. that was headquartered in Hickory, North Carolina, and really found myself in a very similar situation with CommScope, the acquiring entity of integrating now this connectivity solutions business from Avaya into the CommScope business. This particular business and division of Avaya, called Connectivity Solutions, was about a $500 million business in annual revenue. CommScope prior to that was also about $500 million in annual revenue. And so really that business and CommScope grew overnight and doubled their business. But I would say in terms of the international footprint, they just grew exponentially. They had some business prior to that in Brazil and in Belgium, but really overnight with this acquisition of the Connectivity Solutions business from Avaya, they were in well over 30 countries, manufacturing and distribution and a lot of assets and employees all over the world. So so they just quickly found themselves in a very new environment and a whole lot of international complexity. So my first year at CommScope was really doing a lot of what I had done 3 or 4 years prior with the spinoff of Avaya from Lucent Technologies, and doing that for essentially the same business. It was an asset carve-out, so we had to establish a new back-office structure and infrastructure, bank accounts, processes, control systems, and ways of supporting that business around the world and getting off transition service agreements as quickly as we could from Avaya. And so very interesting, when I look back on it, very interesting, 4 or 5 years there between Lucent and Avaya and CommScope. And really after we settled into with CommScope and integrating that business, there were some opportunities at CommScope, and I had an opportunity, given how quickly they were growing, of evaluating where did I want to be, where did I want to be geographically, and what was the next step for my career within the broader corporate finance, accounting, internal audit, lots of different opportunities. And at that time, what I thought was interesting was Treasury. It was a very, very small, lean team. In fact, there was 2 individuals, the treasurer and then a cash administrator at that time for CommScope within corporate Treasury. And so when I decided to join Treasury, I grew the team by 30%. And so we were a team of 3. And from there, the business just continued to grow and evolve over another more than a decade while I was with them. And it was a great opportunity to be with a great company, growing company in a great industry. And CommScope continued to grow organically and through a number of acquisitions. And that's really where I started focusing specifically on corporate treasury.
And then with that, Chris, because you're one of the few candidates, or one of the few people that I've perhaps spoken to rather on the podcast. A lot of people have broken into Treasury as a Treasury assistant, analyst, manager, those earlier moves as such. And yeah, you were joining a smaller Treasury, but you were discovering Treasury as a more senior finance professional. Did that give you a different outlook, do you think? And, because sometimes people get into Treasury and then they try and discover the rest of the business, but they've already found they're sort of in a more specialized area and they're having to force out there. But you were doing the other way around. You'd been out there in the business. You knew a lot of this. Oh, actually, I've discovered Treasury. How did that work?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I had to take a step back and really get familiar with some of the basic elements of Treasury and experience that day in the life of a Treasury analyst or Treasury manager, and understand, what was important, what was priority. And, again, we were a very small team. That team went from 2 to 3 when I joined them. So, and while those 2 individuals, including the treasurer, had been with the company at that point for a long time, everything was changing. They had just doubled their business. They had just grown from being in Canada and Brazil and Belgium, aside from the U.S., to suddenly being in 30 countries. So, frankly, we were all learning together. We were evolving together. And so, it wasn't just me that was experiencing this new environment of Treasury and international Treasury and also some tax aspect of that as that evolved. But we were really doing it together. And that was an exciting time.
And with that, you then grew your Treasury expertise. And, and again, going back to that question, and the reason I say this, I think you bring so much freshness to it sometimes. And I'm not getting a criticism of Treasury professionals who've been it from day one sort of thing, but you were bringing in lots of other things. Did people notice your different viewpoint, would you say? And as you grew within your roles, did they notice that a bit more, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's part of what I would say has certainly driven my career, is always having a broader perspective, a vision, and constantly learning, appreciating value in trying to learn quickly and put that learning to work where I can, not just me, but a team of people can add value, and we can step into where are their needs, where's their complexity that maybe needs some attention to bring some order or to make the complex simple. I really never viewed it or approached it as our sole job or only job. Certainly maybe the most important priority, but not necessarily our only job was managing a list of bank accounts or being able to report out on cash and do cash position every day, which again were certainly priority and most important. But I always looked at where are there connection points, where are the areas where we can step in, where we can fill a need, where we can deal with complexity, where we can learn a certain area and bring some value and order and expertise to it. I think that's what drew me to Treasury in the first place, was knowing that this was a niche space. Early on, I recognized that. And I think that's actually something that attracted me to it. I had some other opportunities at CommScope that I could have pursued and had been in some other areas of accounting and finance at the operating and business unit level, while with Lucent and Avaya and even jobs before that. But I recognized that this treasury area was small. Some might see that as maybe a hurdle or an obstacle, maybe something that they're not interested in. I saw it as, this is a niche. This is something where you can really dive into. You can become the internal expert in this area, and you can really make it your own. And that always excited me. And I would say over the last 20 years, that's consistently what I've seen as I've talked with other companies, large and small companies, and deal with banks and talk with them about what they're talking about with their clients, and going to conferences and talking with different people. A treasury is a niche, and it can be exciting if you approach it in a way where you want to own that and you want to really develop that center of excellence within your company.
And you had an amazing growth throughout there. You made some lovely moves within Treasury, through to becoming the treasurer before you moved into your most recent company, Intrado and things like that. But, what was key to your progression through that? Was it you were there learning the group, learning the ropes, wrong way, but, sort of as your career grew, your roles and responsibilities grew, or how did that go hand in hand? And, what then led to you making the move, to this latest company, I think?
Well, I would say that, again, always had focused, striking this balance of focusing on the day-to-day and what is important for today, but also these other areas where we can bring value. I think over my career, I maybe didn't recognize it right away, but certainly over my career, I think I grew greater appreciation for bringing some things maybe that came natural with some other important areas like developing partnerships, developing teams, developing relationships. We may have been able to step into some complexity and may have been able to add, value in one place or the other. But I think that really started to propel when you build relationships internally, externally, when you build those partnerships and, create kind of this collaborative energy. And I think all of that contributed to, over a period of time, of continually expanding responsibilities, taking on new things, and not being afraid to do that, never being afraid to learn, to step into a space that maybe is not so familiar, but it's a need, and having that eagerness, again, not just myself, but those around me, to step in to something and explore it, learn it, and how can we make it better? And I think just over time, that evolves into expanding responsibilities. And if you're able to do that well, then it can be a great experience to grow the team.
Yes, we spoke about before the show, and we'll go on to your current role as treasurer, but just digging into that for a moment, if it's appropriate, you say about not being fearful, and you've got a team that work around with you and everything else, maybe even in your current role, but how do you elicit or coach those guys around you? Again, we've got people listening today that will say, oh, I've got this lady working for me, I've got this guy working for me, and they seem fearful of taking on responsibility or taking that next step. Is it your responsibility as the treasurer to provide that environment, or what are you giving them, as a team? What's your plan of action to help them, sort of thing?
Yeah. So I think one is, being able to cast vision. It doesn't stop there, but I think it can start there, is casting a vision that where you can provide others with a broader perspective, maybe a fresh perspective, a vision of something that is exciting, is maybe not as narrow focused as maybe what they just naturally came to a role or a position or opportunity with, maybe a more narrow focused perspective. But as soon as I can, being able to broaden that for them and give them vision that we can all embrace, we can own, and that we're excited to get behind. But again, it doesn't stop there, because that vision, when it's broader, can also become intimidating and uncertain of, okay, well, initially I got excited about this vision, but I'm not really sure how to get there. I'm not sure that I know how to get there, or it can just be overwhelming to me. So I think you have to go from casting that vision and creating kind of this collective ownership of that vision to empowering a team, equipping them to be successful, kind of wrapping that all around belief in people, encouragement, partnership to get them to where they need to be. I think it also has to be wrapped up with really a focus on process, on information and how we use information, leveraging technology, and to put those components together to make that vision and attainment of that vision possible and attainable, and something that's also sustainable and repeatable by using, focusing on people and process and technology and control and data. So, and that's a continual effort. That's not a one and done thing. That's just a continual over and over and over of casting vision, empowering people, equipping them to be successful, encouraging them and giving them the right tools. Again, process, technology, data, giving them the tools to be successful. People are going to make mistakes, particularly when you're constantly, over time expanding your territory, stepping into new areas while also trying to support the day-to-day and to do that well. In that environment, you're always learning. You're always looking to get better. And so that means you're going to make mistakes, and to know that it is a partnership. And as long as there's, the right ability to learn and to be part of the team and come to the job every day with the right positive attitude, then okay, that's the essentials for success, not to do it, perfectly all the time. Certainly you want to mitigate mistakes as much as possible, but when you're trying to build a team that is growing and taking on new responsibilities and getting better, there just has to be this understanding that, hey, we're going to make some mistakes along the way, and we're going to make those mistakes together and learn from it and move on.
And you recently won an award. Congratulations. The program of change. And this is what originally I reached out to Chris, although we've got connections in common. I actually read this and was really impressed by massive program of change, in-house bank, managing a transition from a public company to private, which is the thing that a lot of people do the opposite way around, but you've done that. And, with a, clear focus, 18 months transition, so rapid change and everything else, where it's relevant, maybe dig in and explain to people, if you would, the move to the role, or, talk us through all of that massive changes that have been happening. Back to you.
Yeah. So while with Intrado, formerly known as West Corporation, like you said, large global business, $2 billion in annual revenues, really a company that has a portfolio of tech-enabled communication solutions to its customers, essentially having a variety of ways using technology to put our clients in communication with their clients or their constituents, and through lots of different channels, whether that's through text or streaming or, a video or interactive voice recognition type of communication, whatever, but putting solutions in place. That's what Intrado and formerly West Corporation does. And when I joined the company, transitioning from CommScope to West Corporation was a public company, and we, within 18 months of joining the company, we were on a path to go private, acquired by Apollo Group, large private equity, and had experienced that also at CommScope, where we went from public to private and then did an IPO and went back to public before I left CommScope. And with that acquisition by Apollo Group, there was a vision for a lot of transformation and really top down a culture to change and to harvest opportunity out of just transforming the business, taking a lot of great assets and people and solutions and portfolio of clients around the world, but making it better. And in the history of West Corporation, there was a lot of growth through acquisitions. There were some gaps in terms of integration, so there was some history to deal with and to further integrate past acquisitions while also continuing to grow through acquisitions. To date, we've had, I believe, 8 acquisitions since we've gone private with Apollo. And so there was just all of this culture to further integrate the past, to continue to integrate the present and the future, while looking for all opportunities to make the company better, faster, cheaper. And there is, in fact, a complete framework around transformational opportunities and building business cases around that and tracking progress and putting a whole governance structure around transformation for the company. And that applied to finance. It even applied to Treasury. Coming into the role, there was a lot of what I'll say maturing to do in the Treasury function. It was a small team. Casting that vision and kind of broadening the perspective that I mentioned earlier was something that I had to do coming into this role, is repainting the picture for the team of what corporate treasury could look like and frankly should look like to support a global, complex technology company with $2 billion in sales. And so out of a lot of that, what we collectively decided to pursue was a bank transformation effort of consolidating banking partners, reducing our bank account footprint around the world to be more efficient, more cost-effective, but also to add some complexity where it made sense, like in developing some cross-country and multi-currency fiscal sweeping and pooling structures in Europe, and also plugging in technology, pursuing a treasury management system. Over my career, I've gone from developing in-house treasury platforms and systems that would support what we needed to do on a day-to-day basis to also implementing third-party treasury workstations. I've implemented Reval, and more recently with Intrado, we decided to implement Kyriba. So that was a part of our transformational effort. And all of that in the midst of supporting that change, going from public to private in terms of the capital structure and changing our debt portfolio, our hedge portfolio, and all the while, building a sustainable team. So there was a lot there, but yeah, we were busy. Yeah.
I was going to say, because it didn't sound like you were busy enough already. It was like, let's do all this stuff as well. I know. But we spoke before the show, actually, because that was one of the things that I was impressed of from when I read through Chris's background, that, there was all these different things. I was saying, look, you've got day-to-day activity, and Chris brought that up. So, the balance between day-to-day, the sort of team aspects, the, massive immersive projects you get involved in. How do you, maybe balance the demands? Again, this is for the listeners. They're thinking, hang on, how does he, manage all these things? I won't say the answers you've given me, because that'd just be me pretending to be my answers. I'd love to steal some though. But then also, and how, with the planning cycle for all of this stuff, is it sort of day-to-day, week-to-week, quarter, year, right the way through? Or is it sort of, what's the structure of that? So I know, sorry, it's two questions in one, apologies. But how do you balance the demands? And then how do you plan out from that?
Yeah, so I'd say some keys in all of that was patience and communication. Certainly you have to, do a lot of planning to even be able to tackle these multi-pronged, very transformational projects, while also being able to support the day-to-day priorities of the business and managing cash, controls, debt, and all of the things we know are key and priority day-to-day for a corporate treasury organization. So certainly there's planning that has to be done and prioritization, but just knowing that you have to build in some flexibility, some patience along the way to be able to change. You have to communicate well along the way. I think you also have to develop partnerships. What we've gone through as a company and within all the treasury transformation that we did, it wasn't just about treasury. We were highly connected to finance, accounting, accounts receivable, billing, working with legal, working with tax. So we were very cross-functional in our effort. Early on, we brought on support for the project and the transformational goals that we had as a treasury organization to get advocates behind what we thought would bring value to the business. And so it wasn't just us championing the project. It was others that were coming along the ride with us and being advocates for the project. Communicating well outside of treasury and at the values so that we could kind of get that support that we needed and was frankly essential, because we wouldn't be able to do it, on our own. These projects take time. So there is this reality of project fatigue, I think, along the way. And so just knowing that at times we have to take a step back, we have to reflect on kind of where we're at in the project, celebrate some wins along the way, maybe reassess Do we have the right resources? Do we have the right project management elements, project managers and tracking and communication? Do we just need to take a little bit of time to settle in with the milestones we've accomplished before we then ramp back up and take on the next milestones, even though maybe we're not done with the project? So I think just being constantly pragmatic about how you go about the project, being realistic, and having that element of patience and agility and good communication along the way, along with some cross-functional partners, I think is really important.
And in terms of team management and things like that, where do you stand on that? You're talking about the projects themselves, but with the people, how do you coach them? You a manager, or you a coach, or what's the sort of balance, if you like? How do you lead your guys? Because I noticed you've done some studying yourself. You've got CTP and everything else in there. Do you think that's a key thing about it, or is it getting guys that have got really strong tech background, treasury technology? Or what are you looking for, and how do you coach those guys?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of my approach to the team, first of all, certainly being a coach, absolutely. You think of, a coach of, using a sports analogy, a coach of any team, you have to have belief in your players, right? You have to have belief in your people and that they're in the right roles. You can't just put anybody into any position. You have to try and align, natural skills and abilities and passions with the right position. But once you've made some of those decisions, you really have to get behind those individuals, and they have to know that you believe in them. There is coaching and monitoring and calling the plays along the way, to stick with the sports analogy. So it is very much, a coaching approach from my perspective. But in terms of, you kind of also asked the question about, I think, maybe what do I look for in an individual to get on the field with us, right? And to work towards the goals that we want to achieve. Yeah, having a CTP or a background in Treasury, specifically corporate Treasury, I think is valuable. Sometimes I hesitate on saying, is that the most valuable? Certainly to have some background and experience is great. I think besides the formal training of a CTP or, certification in international cash management from, some of the more Treasury associations outside of the U.S., I think those are great for the training. But what I think is also important along with that is it shows that somebody is committed to learning Treasury, that they're committed to that maybe longer term as a profession than maybe somebody that wants to come in and check it out, for lack of a better term, and then move on to something else, right? For a while, I found myself early on in my career in trying to build a team, I found myself being somewhat of a launching pad for other people to then come into the business through Treasury and develop and see a lot of different parts of the business, which is something that is unique and interesting about Treasury. But then they would go off into other parts of the business. And, that was a two-edged sword. It was great that we were doing something well in terms of bringing people in and training them and getting them exposure to the business. But it also was a bit challenging to continually have that be an environment where it's great they're staying with the company, but we have to come in and retrain people. So what I then transitioned to was really looking for individuals that are demonstrating some type of evidence that they see the value. They maybe see Treasury the same way I did early on in my career of, look, this is a niche opportunity, and I want to learn this. I want to invest my own time and my own energy into learning this. And so, like I say, to have the CTP or other training in corporate Treasury is fantastic for that training. But to me, what it also shows is somebody's committing to this as a profession. And that is, you can really get behind that and invest a lot more time and energy into a person that wants to learn it and wants to stay in corporate Treasury.
So before we come to the wrap up of today's show, where I ask you about the future and we'll give you a LinkedIn profile and everything else, but just a pre-question there. So just my last couple of questions. So Chris, you've gone through this process over the past 18 months. You've reduced the banks, 10 down to 2 major banks in the US and number of accounts, and you've rationalized, got this all, this machine, spinning nicely. This is really, and I've heard this a few times with people, done this in a rapid time frame. You're done. Surely what's the next iteration? Is it further technology, or you're bringing this in? It's this well-oiled machine. Where does the next challenge lie for you as a treasurer? What do you see for the Treasury team? What's next on the agenda, as it were?
Yeah, great question. So I guess a couple of things come to mind. So we have invested largely into technology and new process and everything that comes along with doing that, right? Having data at your fingertips, having the benefit of straight through processes. So I think one of our focus is now leveraging that investment and really maximizing that investment. So what more can we do with data? What more can we do with that technology? So that is one. Working capital focus is also an area for us. Again, having this kind of going back to where we started this conversation of always having this broader perspective. Yes, the most important thing day to day is having, solid control of our bank accounts and doing cash position and managing cash well and managing our debt portfolio. But always in parallel to that, having, this attention to what else is out there where maybe we can step in and add value. And I think on broad working capital management, that certainly is an area. Now, for me personally, I have responsibility for billing and global credit and collections and shared services. So I'm naturally tuned into those things. But what I'm referring to here is getting specifically the corporate treasury part of my group to also step into working capital and what information can they provide to that? How can they be part of a broader working capital performance improvement team to bring value to the company? So that is one area that we'll really be investing in. Across the industry, I think, there's so much around robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, and there are very practical ways, I think, that can be applied to corporate treasury. So, for us, we're actually looking at that as a company. We're looking at that a broader finance and accounting perspective, but even within treasury, that's something that we'll be looking into. And, we still have acquisitions in our review mirror to continue to integrate and to add value there as well.
And with yourself, and, as I said, alluded to there, this is, the wrap-up question for today's show, which we always want to, and there's a whole host, we could keep going, but we want to keep it to the sort of half-hour, 40-minute mark with a lot of people listening to this on their commute every day. Looking back at yourself on LinkedIn maybe, and someone looks through your profile and says, do you know what, that sounds like fabulous. That's what I want to do. I'm going to follow in the footsteps of Chris. What would you say to those guys, and, as a piece of advice? And maybe also, I think you very much alluded to, because there's so much going on with yourself with activity, team, projects, everything else, and the balancing of those. What sort of advice would you give to people? What are the sort of 2 or 3 pieces of advice you think people sitting there on the train, right, okay, this is what I need to be thinking about today? What would you sort of pass on to them, if you like, your pearls of wisdom, Chris? It's over to you.
Yeah, great question. And a lot of different things come to mind, and we don't have a ton of time here. We're trying to close out, so I'll try and maybe only mention a few. But, one is really to have this approach of becoming the expert in what you do. What's in front of you day to day, really understand it and put in the time to be the expert in that area, to where others looking on would look at that and say, what he or she does in this area of responsibility, he or she does that very well. Yeah. They know it, and they really are our internal expert in that area. Whatever it is, however big or small somebody might think it is, tackle it and embrace it, own it, and really become the expert in it. In addition to that, and I've kind of talked about this throughout the podcast today, of while doing that, also be on the lookout for other opportunities, not to switch gears and pursue upper opportunities and maybe leave behind what you're doing, but what are some other ways that you can, in parallel to that, to step into and learn it, to maybe add some value, to take on maybe a fractional role in a project or a certain initiative, while also being that expert day to day. So to give yourself exposure, to continue to learn some new areas, and to have some opportunities to grow based on those opportunities. I would also say build relationships. That honestly early on in my career was not something that I valued as much as I do today. Of grow relationships, partnerships, cross-functionally inside and outside the business. That can only help you. It certainly doesn't hurt you. So, growing relationships and knowing that you're going to make mistakes, admit mistakes, learn from them, learn quickly, fail quickly, and learn quickly, and put that learning to your benefit. Those are a few things that come to mind.
Amazing. So, the summary: keep stretching, but don't get complacent. Build relationships, both internal and external. They're always going to help. And know it's going to be a bumpy ride. Prepare for it, but that's what you can do. Look at that. Great nuggets of advice there from Chris. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure, sir, to talk to you today. Thank you for your time. I'm sure we'll do it again on another podcast or on a stage somewhere. Well, thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been, great to chat to you today. We'll put Chris's details in the show notes if he wants to be part of the network of his, but part of his external network, as it were, which is always great to have. Then I'm sure Chris will reach out. But thank you very much for your time today, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Been a lot of fun. Let's do it again.
Great stuff. Thanks very much.